Peter B. Collins, News and Comments. It's Thursday, May 4th, 2017. A dark day in American politics and government. Reaching the bare majority required, House Republicans rammed through the repeal of Obamacare and a replacement package that will sentence millions to death. You might find that an exaggeration to say that this Obamacare repeal amounts to a death sentence for millions of Americans. Last night, as I contemplated this vote and saw that the Republicans could make it work, I posted this on Facebook. I've been observing American politics since Nixon, and the brazen heist that Trump-Ryan hoped to ram through the House today is astounding. The actual terms of the Kill Obamacare bill, its projected costs, the number of people who will lose coverage, none of this is firm or rational. It's a death bazaar, taking health care from middle and low-income people to fund unneeded tax cuts for rich people and corporations. The rewrite of the pre-existing conditions ban with money for high-risk pools will still leave many people to die, even if it's not from the pre-existing condition that actually denied them the coverage. And as you know, I'm not a big fan of Obamacare. It had many problems. It propped up the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies, provided them with millions of subsidized new customers. But it did reduce morbidity in this country and provide health care access for people who otherwise either never would have sought it or would have got it the most costly way, by going to an emergency room at a public hospital. And this effort is so brazenly about the money. The lives at stake, the services that will be cut, the access to medical care early on. All that doesn't matter to these Republicans who are feeding the promise they made their base, the irrational promise that was largely, at least majorly, influenced by how much people hated Barack Obama. They called him a liberal. This was a takeover of, a massive element of our economy by the government. And do you know that recently in a town hall meeting, an alleged Democrat, Senator Dianne Feinstein, was asked about single-payer health care, and she said, "Oh, no, I'm not ready for a government takeover of our health care system." That is bullshit. It's about taking out the insurance part of it, just like Medicare and the VA does. But we are in strange times. And the reason I call this a death bazaar is that over the past week or two, as Republicans have rounded up the votes by twisting arms and promising, the hardline right-winger Tea Party Freedom Caucus jerks, what they've been promising is to deny more people coverage. And to pass this without getting the Congressional Budget Office or any other independent evaluation of it, we know that the previous version was going to kick 24 million people out of health insurance coverage over the next 10 years. Many of them as soon as when this takes effect. And we don't know when it takes effect. Those details have not been revealed to us. And so these people were bargaining over how much money we can get to pay for tax cuts by sentencing more and more middle and lower income Americans to the eventual fate of death. So they got 217 votes, the bare minimum that they needed. No Democrats voted for it. That's progress. There's a little unity there. 20 Republicans voted against it. And this, of course, is a resuscitation of the package that failed about 6 weeks ago. Paul Ryan is claiming victory. And, he had to denigrate the Affordable Care Act, saying it means even higher premiums, fewer choices, more insurance companies pulling out, even more uncertainty, and even more chaos. Well, they created the chaos. They're actively stoking the downward spiral that they project for Obamacare, and they're contributing to it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the substitute the coverage that they're going to offer is what I would call Alabamacare. And forgive me if you're a lovely person who lives in Alabama, but from my perspective, Alabama, Mississippi, some of these deeply red states that wouldn't participate in the Medicaid expansion under Obamacare, free money to cover their most vulnerable citizens, well, that's what we're going to see in the future. And I'm going to get now into some of the details about the package that have emerged just in the last few hours, and I'm still, frankly, catching up. One of the critical elements here is the nature of the bill, and when it goes to the Senate, assuming that the Senate doesn't make massive changes in it, there are rules that they have to abide by in order to get the margin required in the Senate down to 51 votes from the 60-vote cloture requirement. And so that's called the process of reconciliation. And to be fair, that's what Obama and the Democrats used to get Obamacare passed, because the Republicans were unified in their refusal to participate. And so it remains to be seen. And the unpredictability of how this bill will reach the Senate, what the Senate will do, because they are free to offer unlimited amendments there, this could go on for quite some time. But the primary calculation here, which is kicking people off of health insurance so we can give tax cuts to the rich and to corporations, is going to be the central thread, no matter what the the details and the fine points turn out to be. So the subsidies for paying for tax insurance will max out at $4,000 a year for people, I think, over age 55. It starts at $2,000, but currently some people who live at or below the poverty line can get subsidies of as much as $7,000 a year on a $12,000 policy. And they are not going to be able to close that gap with a maximum $4,000 a year tax credit. There's also an insidious clause where they are changing a factor. Currently under Obamacare, under those rules, insurers can't charge older adults more than 3 times what they charge young adults for the exact same coverage. The House bill changes this to a factor of 5. And so you lower the subsidies, you make them age-based, not needs-based, and then you charge people just because of their age. This is really, really ugly. Now, the other big piece here is that Medicaid cuts would total $880 billion over 10 years, and that's roughly the $1 trillion that Trump is shooting for to nominally say that he's paying for the tax cuts. Look, we saved all this money by cutting people's health insurance. So we can now give tax cuts to me and my buddies. And you can bet Trump will benefit from any tax cuts that do get passed. There's also a penalty, not for avoiding coverage. They are removing what's called the individual mandate, and I know that was very unpopular. But the individual mandate was the effort to create the broadest possible insurance pool, including healthy people, so that the costs were properly spread. That's how insurance works. So they've replaced the personal mandate by allowing insurers to charge you a penalty if your coverage lapses. So let's say you leave a job and your COBRA winds down, you don't find a new job, so there's a gap of a few months or a year between your coverage. You will pay a 30% surcharge on premiums, and it doesn't say how long you'll pay that surcharge. What? All they did was remove an unpopular provision and replace it with something that is actually more onerous. Under the bill, states, including those red states, there are 33 of them, can opt out of certain provisions like maternity care, emergency services, that are part of the packages that must be included in Obamacare insurance offerings. They've also lifted a requirement that prohibits insurers from charging higher premiums based on health status. And this is an end run on the ban on pre-existing conditions. And it's also cutting taxes for high-income people by nearly $300 billion over the next 10 years by repealing the payroll tax increase. And that is so classist, so disgusting in an era when we're so aware of the disparities between rich and poor, high incomes, low incomes. To repeal the payroll tax that actually made things a little fairer for the people at the bottom. Because, as you may know, the payroll tax only covers the first, I think it's up to about $115,000 of annual income. You make more than that, you don't pay the tax. That's not progressive, that's highly regressive, and this makes it even more regressive. And I mentioned the $880 billion cut to Medicaid funds. Over at The Intercept, John Schwartz notes that 60% of senior nursing home care is covered by Medicaid. Medicaid is currently open-ended. Anybody who applies for it is covered. But now they're going to ration it. And they won't have the kind of death panels that Sarah Palin dreamed of. Now, they'll just say no coverage. You can't go to a nursing home. Tough shitski. And 60% of senior nursing home care is paid for by Medicaid, and it is not, in fact, covered by Medicare. I hope people will make a big stink about that, and I hope you'll also make a big stink about the cuts to Planned Parenthood. This is purely punitive. It is a one-year cut to Planned Parenthood clinics, and it is brazenly linked to the fact that Planned Parenthood, while it doesn't use any federal dollars to pay for abortions, about 3% of its national operations are related to abortion. They are separately funded. And they're going to lose portions of the other 97% because of what I consider to be an unconstitutional act that flies in the face of Roe versus Wade. And also, it is an ugly violation, I believe, of the First Amendment, because the religious majority is imposing its moral values on funding for health care services that aren't even directly related to the moral values that they're asserting. This is hypocrisy and pandering of the lowest order. And I hope that people will march in the streets and get up in arms and make a lot of noise about this. I could be daydreaming. Will you forgive me? Jason Chaffetz, you know who he is, House Oversight Committee, congressman from Utah, right-wing Republican. He's announced that he's not running for re-election next year, and he kind of murkily said, I'm going to be away for a while for some surgery. But he wheeled himself into the House chamber to cast what you could call the determining vote, because it only passed by one vote, and if he hadn't been there, it wouldn't have passed. Jason Chaffetz came from the hospital where he just underwent foot surgery, fully paid for by congressional congressional health insurance coverage that we, the taxpayers, pay for. And get this. He had surgery on a 12-year-old injury to one of his feet. It looks like his right foot. That's a pre-existing condition. And in the future, perhaps in Utah, a governor and a legislature could make a decision that Jason Chaffetz and his pre-existing condition are not covered. And that irony is being exploited by the Democrats, who are really trying to rub it into the Republicans and make sure that they pay a political price for this. And there may be one. So-called moderate Republicans, you can find a few across the country, may face elimination next year because they voted for this. And one of the real issues here that takes us back to something that happened under the early days of the Bill Clinton administration. He wanted a stimulus package. I think he referred to it as investments. And he twisted arms and made promises to get the votes in the House to pass it. And then it didn't pass in the Senate. And those Democrats who had stuck their necks out to vote for it got pummeled. Many of them lost in the 1994 Newt Gingrich wave election. And so this is the basis for a wave election, a pro-democratic one, in 2018, if the voters operate the way we hope. Of course, gerrymandering can negate that in many places. But here's a kind of comical remark from Lindsey Graham. He was asked if he and other senators are going to vote on the House bill, and he said, well, I don't know what's in it. I'm waiting to see if it's a boy or a girl. But any bill that's been posted less than 24 hours, going to be debated 3 or 4 hours, not scored, we don't know what it'll cost, needs to be viewed with suspicion, he said. You know, I rarely agree with Lindsey Graham, but what he said. So here's Charlie Dent, Pennsylvania Republican. Members have been asked to vote for a bill that is particularly treacherous, that is going to go nowhere in the Senate. This legislation will be gutted. We will have voted for a bill that will never become law. Will it cause headaches for people? Yeah, even Charlie Dent has figured that out. Now, the tax cuts that may be enabled, facilitated by the removal of health insurance and the related subsidies from millions of Americans, could help fuel a corporate tax cut and a special plan to repatriate foreign profits. An Apple computer is the number one offender in the gamesmanship of stashing its profits from foreign operations, many of which are transactions that occurred in the United States. They stashed now $250 billion offshore. So here's what Tim Cook did. He didn't promise Trump an iPhone 7 or 8. He is responding to the president's call for Apple to start expanding its manufacturing operations in the United States. So Tim Cook says, okay, I'm proud to tell you we're creating an advanced manufacturing fund, and we're initially putting $1 billion into the fund. And when Jimmy Cramer, the loudmouth on, where is he, CNBC, asked him, where are you going to get that money? He said, well, we're going to borrow it from ourselves. And this is what Apple did in recent years to pay dividends. They borrowed money from their foreign subsidiaries rather than bring that money home and pay a tax on it. So this is a bit of extortion. Tim Cook played good cop here, saying, yeah, let's expand. Here's $1 billion. American manufacturing. We're going to create some jobs here. But we want you to loosen the rules and lower the tax rate so we can bring home the money that is the product of our long-running tax evasion schemes. And Tim Cook wants you to feel sorry for him because he has to borrow money to invest in the United States. And it's all such bullshit. You know, I checked. It turns out that most of the money that Apple claims is stashed offshore is held in accounts in the names of its foreign subsidiaries at the Bank of New York. The money isn't actually offshore. It's all just bookkeeping, creative accounting. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Brian Mazzy, Mona Kobus, Anna Gordonier, they're monthly subscribers. And look here, Jens Ivan Nielsen, who lives on a little island off the coast of Denmark, sends me lovely emails, sometimes free verse in English. He just renewed his annual subscription. Jens, I am very grateful. And I invite others to join in. If you're not currently a subscriber, you can fix that in just a couple of minutes. Click on over to peterbcollins.com, then pull on the menu button. When it pulls down, click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and that's where you can choose the level of support that's comfortable for you. Following up on James Comey, the FBI director's testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, some interesting commentary in the Washington Post. First, Dana Milbank. Headline, Now We Know. Bill Clinton cost his wife the presidency. And in almost 3 hours into the hearing yesterday, FBI Director Comey said that his decision to go public about the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails and not to consult his boss at the Justice Department, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, was triggered by that late June meeting where Bill Clinton asked to climb aboard the Attorney General's jet when they were both parked on the runway, the tarmac, in Phoenix. Said Comey, "The capper was, and I'm not picking on Lynch, who I like very much, but her meeting with President Clinton on that airplane was the capper for me, and he decided to step away and announce without consulting anyone else that Hillary Clinton shouldn't be charged." Now, for me, that capper would have led me to say, all right, I'm not going to let these mofos game the system. We're going to indict her for false statements, for mishandling of classified material. I think there was plenty of basis to do that. So, in Comey's telling, he said, having done that in July, and then having testified repeatedly under oath that we're done with the Clinton investigation, it would be a disastrous, catastrophic concealment not to go public on October 28th with the newly discovered emails on Anthony Weiner's laptop. And Milbank says, if Bill Clinton hadn't boarded that plane in June, Comey might not have spoken out in July, which means he wouldn't have felt compelled to speak up again in October, which means Hillary Clinton would have won the election in November. You want to blame it on the Russians? Blame it on Beale. And the inconsistencies of Comey yesterday are still causing jaws to drop and heads to shake. Now, also at the Post published today is a piece by James Downey, who is the digital opinions editor of the Post. And he took the challenge that James Comey laid out yesterday in the hearing. He said, you want to go back to October 28th and tell me what you would do? Well, Downey says, challenge accepted. And he said, first of all, there's a bit of sleight of hand here because the rest of the world didn't know what Comey and a few others in government did know at the time. We didn't know there was no new evidence of wrongdoing on Clinton's part. We didn't know that there was also an active probe into the Trump campaign. We didn't know that that probe had turned up concrete evidence of contacts between Russia and Trump advisors. Comey knew. And Downey says that whether Comey chose to speak or conceal, he should have applied that choice to both candidates. And given the dangers of revealing the Trump probe and reviving the Clinton investigation right before the election, the best course likely would have been to remain silent on both. I think that's interesting commentary. Let me know what you think about that. And finally, on the Comey testimony, I'm linking to Kevin Gostola's takeaways from Comey's comments about WikiLeaks and the threat that Comey's remarks and attitude pose to our First Amendment rights. And he quotes Comey that he stated WikiLeaks is an important focus of intelligence agencies. He acknowledged the First Amendment rights that journalists have in the U.S. while arguing that WikiLeaks doesn't engage in journalism. And when a Republican Senator, Ben Sasse, asked Comey why Assange has not been charged with the crime, Comey didn't want to confirm whether there were charges pending, but came pretty close by saying that Assange hasn't been apprehended because he's inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And we've heard rumors for years that there was a secret grand jury indictment of Assange, and they're just waiting for the opportunity to serve him. Comey also went on to say that while he cares deeply about the First Amendment and the ability of a free press to get information, he said it crosses a line when it comes from being about trying to educate a public and instead becomes about intelligence porn. And as I mentioned yesterday, that's a line that was written by somebody else. It was part of his talking points. It was intended to draw headlines and create some kind of a weird notion of intelligence porn. And as I've noted, if we didn't have secrets about secrets about secrets and all of this information that's classified primarily to prevent embarrassment, well, there wouldn't be any porn for anybody to be gazing at. But the way that he tries to marginalize WikiLeaks and make them into an agent of the enemy, I think is very dangerous. And Assange has said, we clearly have said that our source is not a member of the Russian state. And even the U.S. government is not suggesting that our source is a member of the Russian state. And Gostola cites commentary from the former director of national intelligence to that effect. So I'm linking to that story, and I encourage you to read it. Gostola is a bright analyst of these issues. Today, pandering to the evangelicals who were a core group of the voters claimed to have put Trump in the White House. Well, the hypocrite in chief was pandering to the max. He trotted out Mike Pence, who talked sincerely about his religious values and how important it is to protect them. And then Trump signed what is a hugely watered-down executive order, which he claims will promote religious freedom, but it really just asks the IRS not to heavily enforce the laws that are already on the books. And I view this as crossing a serious line, because the bottom line is that Trump wants churches and pastors to be able to engage in politics in support of individual candidates and to be able to preach from the pulpit. And I believe that the IRS regulations are appropriate, that you should not have tax-exempt status if you are actively promoting political candidates and causes. The two, I think, are inimical. And yet, this hypocrite, and why is it that evangelicals support Trump and believe his bullshit? He told a Rose Garden audience, "We're a nation of believers. Faith is deeply embedded in the history of our country." God. Today I'm releasing to my subscribers a very interesting new interview with Peter Van Buren. Van Buren spent 24 years at the State Department. I've talked with him many times, and he has a lot of insight. And he really surprised me today because I asked him what he thinks of Rex Tillerson, the new Secretary of State, the budget cuts proposed by the White House, any kind of reorganization that might take place. And Van Buren quite candidly says that the State Department needs to be restructured. But he says Rex Tillerson is not likely to be doing it or to be doing it right. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Peter Van Buren.
But in theory, the secretary represents the final approver. So it works this way. I'm at the bottom, and word comes down that Secretary Tillerson is going to Saudi Arabia, which they just announced, I guess. And so what are the issues in Saudi Arabia today? So somebody at the bottom of the pile who spent his whole pathetic life doing this says, well, here are the top 5 issues. And then that goes to my boss. And my boss says, no, you can't say number 4. Trump loves that guy. So get rid of that one. Give us another one because we have to have 5. And that process will continue until the document reaches towards the Secretary of State, where his or previously her people will further refine this so that by the time it reaches the secretary, it absolutely agrees with what he or she has already said previously. Mm-hmm. That is not a recipe for good policy making. It's a good recipe for happy bureaucracies, I guess.
You can hear the full interview with Peter Van Buren. I'm releasing it to subscribers today at peterbcollins.com and most of our online outlets, including TuneIn, iTunes. See, I was stuck there because I've been hammering Tim Cook. Also, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, and that place in Germany that hosts my podcasts. A couple of quickies here. Russia, Iran, and Turkey have signed a memo to create 4 safe de-escalation zones in Syria. The language is very murky. Basically, they're saying that they're only going to focus on the Islamic State, al-Nusra, extremist groups, and, of course, they're committed to defending the Assad government and taking on anybody who attacks that Damascus government. So I'm not sure how meaningful this will be. I think the most notable part is that the U.S. is not involved in any way. Trump has announced some travel plans. He's going to go to Saudi Arabia and Israel later this month and then pop in to meet Pope Francis and work on more of his pandering to religious interests. This is also part of a trip that will include meetings of NATO and the Group of 7 economic powers in Brussels and in Sicily. And we'll see how Trump plays on the international stage. And finally, another airline passenger conflict. This one's a little complicated. It was a Southern California dad with his wife and 2 kids. A third child had been booked onto another flight in order to make room for a toddler and the toddler's, car seat. So Brian and Brittany Shear of Huntington Beach, which is a coastal suburb of Los Angeles, were leaving the Kahului Airport in Maui when they got into an argument about how they had managed their seating. Now it appears that Brian Shear tried to bend the rules a little bit. He had bought a seat in the name of his teenage son, and the teenager is the one he put on another flight in order to make room for this infant. But the airlines don't allow you to change the names on tickets anymore, and they were really rigid about this, I think unnecessarily so. But Shear was insistent, look, I bought that seat. You're saying you're going to give that away to someone else when I paid for that seat, and that's not right. And so they threatened to pull him off the plane, and he resisted, and it apparently didn't get physical, but he did leave the plane, and he reports that he had to eat the cost of 3 airline tickets on the flight that he was bumped from, rent a hotel for the night, and buy 3 more tickets to fly home the next day. And it was all an argument over whether the toddler could be in the car seat they brought on board or had to be held in arms. And in fact, the FAA regulations support the family's contention that using the car seat is the preferred method. And since they had paid for a ticket, I think they were entitled to a seat. They shouldn't try these issues on an airliner that is preparing to take off. Thanks for joining me for my News and Comment podcast. Hey, tomorrow, John Kiriakou is going to join me on our Facebook Live video feed. I hope you'll be there.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.